"Get that old woman out of here." That was how my daughter chose to respond when she learned I had pneumonia. My name is Clara M. Lewis. I am 68 years old. And the woman yelling at me, her face twisted with disgust, her voice full of contempt, was my daughter, Yolanda. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, because there is no gentle version of this story. If you're listening to me now, I want you focused on the truth, not softened by sentiment. I was sick. That's it. I was sick, and for that, I was humiliated, expelled, and treated like something filthy that needed to be thrown out. Earlier that afternoon, a doctor at Northside Medical had told me I had a mild case of pneumonia. She was calm, professional, kind. She explained that it was caught early, that it wasn't severe, that with antibiotics, rest, and fluids, I would recover just fine. "You'll need a quiet place to rest," she said. "No stress." I remember nodding, thinking, "Good, I'll go home." Home, at that point, meant Yolanda's house, the house I had helped her buy, the house I had lived in quietly for years, taking the smallest room, paying what I could, watching the children so she could work, cooking meals, staying out of the way. I never called it my house, even though my money had built more of it than she liked to remember. When I walked in that evening, prescription in my purse and the doctor's note folded neatly in my coat pocket, Yolanda didn't even ask how I was feeling. "What did the doctor say?" she asked, already irritated. "I have pneumonia," I said gently, "but it's mild." The doctor said. She exploded. "Are you out of your mind?" she shouted. "Pneumonia? In my house? With my kids?" Her voice rose with every word. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? Do you want to infect us? Do you want to kill my children?" "I'm not contagious," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The doctor explained. She cut me off with a bitter laugh. "Oh, please. You old people always say that. Next thing you know, we're all in the hospital because you couldn't be responsible." I felt my face burn. Sam and Emmy were sitting on the couch, staring at us, their eyes wide and frightened. I lowered my voice instinctively. "Yolanda, please," I said. "The kids." "That's exactly my point," she snapped. "The kids, they come first, not you." I tried again. I explained the medication, the rest, the fact that I could stay in my room. I even offered to wear a mask. I was grasping for anything that might remind her I was human. That's when Marcus finally spoke. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "maybe it's best if you stay somewhere else for now, just until you're fully better, you know. To be safe." I turned to him, stunned. "Marcus, I don't have anywhere else." He shrugged, uncomfortable but firm. "There are shelters, or motels. You're independent. You can figure something out." Independent. The word hit me harder than the shouting. Yolanda took it as encouragement. "Exactly," she said. "You're grown. You can take care of yourself. Find a place. Come back when you're completely better. Not before." She stepped toward me then, too close, and shoved me toward the door. I stumbled, catching myself on the wall. Before I could say anything, she grabbed my coat from the chair, my purse from the table, and flung them onto the porch. "Go," she said. "Now." I stood there, shaking, my chest tight not from the pneumonia, but from the memory that came rushing in uninvited. I saw myself 25 years earlier, sitting on the bathroom floor with Yolanda cradled in my arms, her body burning with fever. I remembered the nights I slept upright in a chair because she couldn't breathe lying down, the hospital visits, the missed shifts, the prayers whispered into her hair when I thought I might lose her. I never once thought about my own safety. I never once thought about convenience. I thought about my child. Now that same child was pushing me out of the house like trash, telling me to find shelter until I was useful again. Sam stood up suddenly. "Mom, stop," he said, his small voice breaking. Yolanda ignored him. "Take your things and go," she said. "You can come back when you're not a risk to this family." I bent down and hugged my grandchildren quickly before Yolanda could stop me. Emmy clung to me, crying. Sam whispered, "Grandma, don't go." I kissed their foreheads, tears blurring my vision. "I'll be okay," I lied. Then I stepped outside. The door shut behind me. Not slammed, not dramatically, just closed final and quiet. Yolanda tossed one last bag onto the porch and locked the door. I stood there, in the cold, holding my things, feeling something deep inside me fracture and then harden. That was the moment I stopped being a mother in my daughter's eyes. And it was the moment I began to understand exactly who she had become. I walked away from that house slowly, my breath shallow, my heart heavy but my mind clear. Because what Yolanda didn't realize what she would soon learn was that she hadn't just thrown out a sick old woman. She had pushed away the one person who knew the full truth about that house, that money, and the life she thought she controlled. If you feel for Clara, tap like and comment where you're watching from. You might find someone nearby watching with you. And I was done protecting her from the consequences of her own cruelty. I didn't go far that night, just far enough that I couldn't see the house anymore. There's something bitter about walking away from a place you helped build, holding nothing but a coat and a cracked purse. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens in comfortable suburbs after dinner, when dishes are clean, children are bathed, and doors are locked against the world outside. I kept walking past houses with porch lights glowing like halos over doorsteps. Some had wind chimes, others had pumpkins still sitting out, even though Thanksgiving had passed. I saw silhouettes through curtains, people moving in warm kitchens, laughter on TV, the clinking of cutlery, and all I could think was, not one of them knows that a mother just got thrown out like garbage. When I reached the intersection near Springvale and Harton, I finally pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, from cold or heartbreak. I couldn't tell. Maybe both. I scrolled past Yolanda's name quickly. It burned to look at it. Instead, I called Evelyn. Evelyn had been my closest friend since we were both in our early 20s, working night shifts at Street Augustine Medical. She had been a nurse. I had worked in billing and patient accounts. She retired to a small house near the church, always kept a guest room ready just in case. She picked up on the second ring. "Clara?" My voice cracked before I could say hello. "Hey," I whispered. I'm outside. Don't worry, I'm not at the hospital. Just not at home either." There was a pause, then, "You sound sick." "I am." "You need a bed or a ride?" "Just a bed." She didn't ask anything else. "I'll leave the porch light on." It took me another 10 minutes to get there. Her porch smelled faintly of mint and old wood. She opened the door before I even knocked. Evelyn was a tall woman, still strong for 71, wearing her usual house robe and slippers with thick socks. She didn't hug me right away. Instead, she gave me a long look, eyes narrowing slightly. Then she stepped back. "Come on in. Tea or hot water bottle?" "Tea," I coughed. "Please." Her house was quiet, but not sterile. Books stacked neatly on the side table, gospel music humming low from a kitchen radio, a framed picture of her grandniece in graduation robes. She handed me a cup a few minutes later and sat across from me in her recliner. "Now," she said, "I didn't ask earlier, but I'll ask once what happened." I stared into my tea. The smell of chamomile hit me like a memory. I had made this for Yolanda once, when she was 15 and bedridden for 3 days. "She threw me out," I said finally. "Yolanda, because I have pneumonia." Evelyn didn't gasp. She just blinked, slowly. "Said it to your face?" She yelled it. She took a sip from her own mug. "That girl has lost her mind." I couldn't speak. The tears were too close now, and I hated crying, especially in front of someone who had seen me at my strongest. She said I should stay away until I'm not a risk to the family, told me to find shelter, like I'm some stranger at the bus station. Evelyn leaned back, her eyes soft but sharp. "You helped raise her kids. I changed their diapers. I stayed up with Sam when he had the flu. She doesn't remember that. She doesn't want to." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that doesn't beg to be filled. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "You're staying here for as long as you need. You understand me?" I nodded. "And don't you go feeling like a burden. I got too much space and not enough company." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." But even as I said it, something twisted in my chest. Because I didn't want to be taken in out of kindness. I didn't want to be pitied. I wanted to go home. Only now I wasn't even sure if that house was home anymore. Later that night, after Evelyn had gone to bed, I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The shadows moved across the plaster as tree branches swayed outside the window. I coughed once, then again, feeling the ache settle deeper. My mind wouldn't stop replaying Yolanda's face. Not the yelling no, that part was already starting to go dull. It was her eyes, Cold, calculated. There was no fear in them, not really. There was planning. That thought hit me hard. I sat up in bed. Planning. She had been distant for weeks, snapping easily, whispering with Marcus when they thought I wasn't listening. They had asked strange questions about my life insurance not long ago. I'd brushed it off as concern. Suddenly, I remembered the time last month when I'd walked into the kitchen and found Yolanda sorting through old paperwork from the office drawer I kept locked. She'd claimed she was just tidying up. Now it made sense. She hadn't pushed me out of the house to keep her children safe. She had pushed me out because I was no longer useful, because maybe she thought pneumonia was the beginning of the end. I pulled out my purse and opened the side flap. My life insurance policy was still there, still in my name with no one listed as a beneficiary. At least, that's how I left it last time I checked. But I hadn't looked recently. I felt something cold settle inside me, not grief, not betrayal. To one. Resolve. The kind I used to feel when I stood up to department heads at the hospital. The kind I felt when George passed and I had to bury him with dignity even when the insurance took weeks to release. The kind of resolve that carried a woman through hard winters and long, aching nights with no one but herself to lean on. I wasn't going to play the victim. I wasn't going to cry at the door she slammed in my face. I was going to find out exactly what Yolanda and Marcus had planned. And when I had the truth in my hand, I would decide on my terms what they deserved. Because this wasn't just about pneumonia. This was about being discarded, being underestimated. And I had spent too many years swallowing disrespect in the name of family. No more. If they thought I was too weak to fight back, they were about to learn who raised them. Evelyn's guest room was quiet that morning, almost too quiet for someone who had spent the last several years waking up to the sounds of cartoons, cereal bowls clinking, and Yolanda shouting instructions across the house. Here, the silence felt like a clean sheet. It gave me space to breathe, but it also gave my thoughts room to speak louder. By 7 a.m., I was already up and dressed. Not because I had anywhere to be, but because I needed to feel upright, grounded. My body was sore, my chest tight, but the antibiotics had started to do their work. The fever had dropped. The coughing wasn't as violent. I sat at Evelyn's small kitchen table, a cup of black coffee in front of me, my insurance documents spread out like puzzle pieces. The official letterhead still had that faint blue ink I always liked. It reminded me of when George and I first filled out the policy, just before he got sick. I remembered how serious he had been, how carefully he had reviewed each clause, like he already knew I'd be handling everything alone someday. At the time, we hadn't named Yolanda or anyone as the beneficiary. It was one of those things we left open, saying we'd figure it out later. But life had a way of moving fast and leaving things behind. The last time I'd reviewed the papers was nearly 2 years ago. Now, something inside me was nagging, warning me that it was time to check again. I logged into the online portal using the login I had written down on an old bank envelope. Thank God I'd brought it with me. Password accepted. I went straight to Policy Details. Scrolled down. My hand froze. Beneficiary, Yolanda M. Lewis. Effective date, 6 months ago. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, to flicker, to explain itself. But it didn't. It just sat there, plain and silent, a quiet betrayal laid out in Times New Roman. I hadn't changed this. I hadn't approved anything, which meant someone else had. Someone who had access to my documents. Someone who knew my date of birth, my social security number. Someone who lived under the same roof. My own daughter. Damn, I whispered, barely hearing myself. Behind me, Evelyn walked in with her slippers dragging softly over the linoleum. She didn't say anything at first, just poured herself some coffee and leaned against the counter. "You look like someone just walked over your grave," she said after a moment. "She changed my beneficiary," I replied, without telling me. Evelyn nodded once, slow. "That girl's playing a dangerous game." I turned to face her. "She did it 6 months ago. That's around the time she started asking if I had a will." Evelyn took a sip of her coffee and watched me. "You gonna do something?" "I already started," I said. "I saved screenshots. I'm calling the insurance company today. If she forged my signature, that's fraud." "You want help?" "I want to know what else she touched. The house, the medical files, maybe even the bank." Evelyn stepped forward, put her hand on my shoulder. "Clara, I'll say this once. Don't let your anger rush you. Be smart. Be quiet. Let her keep thinking you're just an old woman licking her wounds. I looked at her and nodded. That's exactly what I plan to do. By noon, I had already called the insurance company and scheduled a full review of recent activity. They promised to send a copy of the authorization form used to change the beneficiary. I knew Yolanda's handwriting like the back of my hand. If it was forged, I'd see it. If it was hers, well, then I'd know for certain. That evening, Evelyn drove me to the pharmacy. I didn't want to go alone, my legs still ached, but more than that, I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. As we pulled into the parking lot, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Yolanda's car. It was unmistakable. Burgundy Toyota, dent on the left rear fender, proud PTO mom sticker peeling off the bumper. She was standing at the pharmacy window, her back to us, holding her phone in one hand. Marcus was beside her, scrolling on his own phone. They looked like any other couple, normal, occupied, busy. But I knew better. I told Evelyn to wait. I stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the entrance. I kept my hood up. They hadn't seen me yet. As I neared the entrance, I heard Yolanda speaking to the clerk. Yes, I'm picking up for Clara Lewis. Antibiotics and cough suppressant. Yes, that's her date of birth. My jaw clenched. She was picking up my medication. Without asking, I stepped forward. Excuse me, I said loudly. Yolanda turned. The color drained from her face. Mom? Surprised to see me? I said, calm as stone. Marcus quickly backed away, as if the air between us had turned dangerous. You shouldn't be out, Yolanda said. You're sick, and you shouldn't be picking up medication for someone you threw out of your house. I was just trying to help. Help? I cut her off. By controlling my medical care? By changing my insurance policy? Her mouth opened, then closed. The pharmacist looked confused. Do you still want the prescription, ma'am? I'll take it, I said. Thank you. I turned back to Yolanda. I'll be in touch. Don't come to Evelyn's. Don't call. Just wait. You'll hear from me soon enough. I didn't wait for her to reply. I walked out, feeling my heart pound, not from illness, but from a new kind of fire building inside me. I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I spent the next 2 days collecting evidence. Not because I wanted revenge, no, that would have been too easy, too dramatic. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about clarity, about truth, about letting the light pour into the parts of my life I had tried too long to keep gentle, quiet, and unseen. Yolanda had counted on my silence. She had always counted on that. And for years, I had given it to her. I let her talk over me at family dinners. I let her roll her eyes when I offered advice. I had stepped back when she needed space, and stepped in when she needed help. I told myself that was love. But what she did, rewriting my paperwork behind my back, putting my life into her name, was not love. It was theft dressed up as care. By Friday morning, the documents arrived. The insurance company had overnighted everything. The moment I opened the envelope and saw the authorization form, my stomach turned. I knew that handwriting, and it was not mine. It was Yolanda's. She had signed my name. I stared at the signature for a long time, the way someone might stare at an old photo of a loved one smiling, only to realize they were faking it the whole time. Evelyn stood beside me, looking over my shoulder. That's felony fraud, she said flatly. At least 5 years if they press charges. I shook my head. I'm not going to the police. Not yet. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Clara, don't tell me you're still protecting her. I'm protecting me. I want to do this on my own terms. You sure about that? I nodded. She thinks I'm weak. Let her think it a little longer. Later that afternoon, I called Yolanda's old financial advisor, Thomas Kellerman. He had helped me back when I refinanced the house in my name, long before Yolanda got married. He was retired now, but he picked up my call on the first ring, his voice familiar and warm. Clara Lewis? Now there's a name I haven't heard in years. You still living out in Dunhill? Not anymore, I said. I need to ask a favor. Within an hour, I was at his office. We sat in his cozy study books on law, real estate, and tax codes lined every shelf. He reviewed my insurance forms, the recent property filings, and the loan papers I had signed years ago. He frowned. She's been setting this up for a while, he said, quietly. The policy, the deed. Even the equity looks like she tried to start a second mortgage under your name last month. It didn't go through. Probably didn't have all the signatures. I sat back, heart pounding. "She's trying to make it so when you die, everything rolls to her," he continued. "No probate, no questions, quick and clean." I stared at the floor. I think she was hoping pneumonia would push things along. He nodded, then leaned forward. "Do you want to go after her?" "No," I said slowly. "I want her to confess. Publicly." Thomas smiled. "Now that's a better plan." I told him what I had in mind. It wasn't about ruining Yolanda. I didn't want to see her jailed, not if I could help it. What I wanted was a confrontation she couldn't walk away from, a moment where the lies collapsed in front of witnesses. I spent the weekend preparing. I had Evelyn help me review files. Thomas drafted a formal notice of financial inquiry, something that looked legal enough to scare Yolanda, but wasn't actually a lawsuit. Just yet. We planned the meeting for Monday. Neutral ground. Church basement. The place where Yolanda had once held her baby shower. It was fitting. When the day came, I asked Evelyn to come with me, not to speak, just to sit in the corner and watch. She brought a notepad and the same calm she always carried. Yolanda arrived 15 minutes late, Marcus trailing behind her like a tired ghost. She wore a beige trench coat and no makeup, her hair pulled tight. "What is this about?" she snapped as soon as she saw me sitting there. I gestured to the table. "Sit, this won't take long." They sat, arms crossed. I took out the documents, the policy change, the forged signature, the bank attempt. I laid them out slowly, carefully, like cards in a poker game. Then I looked at her, square in the eyes. "I know what you did," I said. "And now, so do you." Yolanda's face paled. Marcus shifted in his seat. "You're overreacting," she said. "We were just trying to protect your interests." "By committing fraud?" I asked. "No one was trying to hurt you," she argued. "We just needed to make sure the family was taken care of, in case something happened." "You mean in case I died?" I leaned forward. "That's what you're saying. You were hoping I'd fade out quietly so you could inherit what you never earned." Marcus finally spoke. "It wasn't like that." I cut him off. "You stood there when your wife kicked me out into the cold. You said nothing. Don't pretend you were innocent." Yolanda was trembling now, but her voice rose. "You don't understand. You've always made me feel small, always controlled everything. I just wanted something for once that was mine. And so you stole it." I needed to feel powerful. The words hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn scribbled something in her notepad. I nodded. "Well, now you're going to tell the truth. In front of the pastor, in front of your children, in front of everyone." Yolanda's eyes widened. "You wouldn't—" "I will. I'll lose my job." "Then you shouldn't have gambled with your mother's name." We sat in silence for a long minute. Then Yolanda whispered, "What do you want?" "An apology," I said. "Not just to me, to your children, to Marcus, to our community. I want you to own what you did, and I want you to start paying back every dollar I loaned you, every cent, publicly. And if I do, I won't press charges." Yolanda looked down, then nodded. Once. It wasn't victory, but it was a beginning. 3 days passed before Yolanda made good on her word. 3 long days where I waited, uncertain if she would actually go through with the apology or if her pride would rise up again and burn what little bridge we had left. I didn't reach out. I didn't nudge her. I had learned my lesson with Yolanda. If you give her room to lie, she'll build herself a palace of excuses. But then, on a quiet Thursday morning, the email came. Subject line, Statement of Apology and Repayment Plan. No greeting, no warmth, just a PDF attachment, formally typed, signed in digital ink. It read, "To whom it may concern, I, Yolanda M. Lewis, take full responsibility for making unauthorized changes to my mother, Clara M. Lewis's insurance policy and for attempting to manage her financial assets without consent. These actions were taken out of fear and poor judgment, and I deeply regret the pain I caused. I also acknowledge the substantial financial support my mother provided to me over the past 15 years, including assistance with a home down payment, medical bills, and household expenses. I agree to repay $42,700 over a structured plan of monthly installments. This statement serves as my formal apology and as a public acknowledgement of my wrongdoing. Yolanda M. Lewis, the 2nd of March 2026. I stared at the document for a full 5 minutes before I breathed out. Evelyn read it over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. "Well, Would you look at that? A full confession. She even put the number in. She got it right, I said. Down to the last penny. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. I felt settled. It wasn't about the money. Lord knows, I had let go of that money years ago. This was about dignity, about being seen, about putting the truth on record in a world that so often silences women like me. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Pastor Willard. She asked to meet with me, he said gently. Yolanda. She wants to read her statement aloud at Sunday service. With your permission. I blinked. At church? Yes. She says she wants to make amends. Not just to you, but to the community. For a moment, I said nothing. My mind went back to the Sunday potlucks where Yolanda used to bring cornbread with too much sugar, the Sunday school lessons I used to teach, the pew where George and I sat every Easter morning. All right, I said. Let her speak. And that's how I found myself sitting in the front pew 3 days later, surrounded by faces I had known for decades. Some had already heard whispers. Evelyn had let it slip to a few of her knitting group friends, and you know how stories move through churches quick and laced with commentary. Yolanda stood at the pulpit, wearing a plain navy dress and low heels. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken from sleepless nights. She held a sheet of paper in both hands. When she began to read, her voice shook, but she didn't stop. She read every word of that apology. She named the acts, she named the consequences, and she named me not as the sick old woman she had pushed out, but as her mother, her protector, her provider. When she finished, the room was silent. No applause, no gasps, just silence. And then Pastor Willard said, "Thank you, Yolanda. You may sit." She walked back down the aisle, head lowered, passing pews that once held her Sunday school teachers, her neighbors, the women who brought casseroles when Sam was born. She sat beside Marcus, who didn't say a word. After service, people approached me in small groups. Some offered hugs, others just nodded with quiet respect. No one asked questions. They didn't need to. The truth was already spoken. That night, Evelyn made fried chicken and sweet potatoes, and we ate in silence, both of us exhausted. "You think she meant it?" Evelyn asked finally. "I think she meant to protect herself," I said. "But in the end, she said the truth. And sometimes, saying it is the first step toward meaning it." A week later, the first repayment check arrived, hand-delivered, no note. I didn't cash it right away. I kept it on my nightstand for 2 days, just to remind myself, this really happened. I really stood up. But that chapter wasn't fully closed. There was still the matter of the house. The deed was still in my name, though Yolanda and Marcus had been trying to wrangle it into theirs quietly for months. Now, with the storm out in the open, I had a decision to make. Evelyn brought it up while we were grocery shopping. "You gonna let them keep it?" "They've raised their kids there," I said. "The children don't deserve more upheaval." "So you're letting them win?" I shook my head. "No, I'm giving them terms." And I did. I met with a lawyer Thomas recommended. We drafted a contract. Yolanda and Marcus could remain in the home under 2 conditions. First, that they continued the repayment plan faithfully, and second, that the deed would remain in my name until the loan was fully repaid. If they defaulted or failed to meet any condition, I had the right to sell the house. I delivered the paperwork myself. Yolanda didn't argue, she signed. There were no more raised voices, no slammed doors, only silence and the weight of consequence settling where entitlement used to live. I walked back to Evelyn's that afternoon, stopping to admire the daffodils blooming along the fence line. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But I was no longer a woman waiting on love that refused to show up. I was no longer a mother begging for a seat at the table she built. I was Clara M. Lewis, and I was finally, fully, standing on my own. The day the second repayment check arrived, I didn't feel surprise. I felt a strange kind of peace. It came in a plain white envelope, dropped gently through Evelyn's mail slot. No note again, just the check dated, signed, and correct to the dollar. Part of me had wondered if Yolanda would stumble after the public apology. If shame or resentment would make her drag her feet. But no. 2 weeks, 2 checks, on time. I stood by Evelyn's kitchen window, the check in my hand, watching the street outside as wind teased the leaves off the trees. The neighborhood felt different these days, sharper, clearer. Maybe it was the air, Maybe it was me. You think she's changed? Evelyn asked, sipping her tea. No, I said without thinking, but I think she's waking up. That afternoon, I walked alone through downtown Dunhill. I hadn't strolled these streets in a long time. The bakery with the butter rolls George loved was still there, though the sign was faded now. The library where I used to take Yolanda as a child had a new mural, young hands planting trees under a glowing sun. I stopped at the community board and tacked up a flyer. It was something I had printed the night before. Financial Literacy for Women Over 50, free workshop series, led by Clara M. Lewis. Starting April 10, church basement, at 5 p.m. Evelyn had rolled her eyes when I first told her about the idea. Of course you'd turn all this mess into a class, she'd laughed. Only you would take betrayal and turn it into bullet points. But she said it with pride. The kind of pride that sticks. I had spent most of my life behind the curtains supporting, fixing, cleaning, teaching quietly at the edges. But now I wanted to stand at the front of the room. Not for applause, but for the women who never got taught how to protect what they earned. Who thought being kind meant being silent? Back at Evelyn's, I started preparing the curriculum. I drafted lesson plans, understanding insurance policies, reading loan contracts, identifying red flags in shared accounts. All the things I had once assumed Yolanda knew, things I'd trusted her to honor. On Saturday, Pastor Willard called again. I heard you've been busy, he said, voice warm. The flyer's making its rounds. I've had 3 ladies sign up already. That's good news, I said. It's needed. I agree. And Clara, I've been thinking. This Sunday, we're doing a sermon on restoration. Would you be willing to speak for 5 minutes? Not about Yolanda specifically, just your journey. Quiet strength. The kind of resilience that doesn't get headlines. I paused. My instinct was to say no. To stay small, stay private. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I'll be there, I said. That Sunday, I wore the navy dress George had bought me on our 20th anniversary. It still fit, though the fabric had softened from time. I stepped up to the pulpit with my notes in hand and my heart calm. I want to talk to you today about something we don't often speak out loud, I began. The kind of pain that doesn't leave bruises, the kind of betrayal that happens not in alleys or headlines, but around dinner tables, inside family rooms, among people we love. The church was silent. Sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't look like yelling. Sometimes it looks like walking away, like drawing a line, like saying, no more, even when it breaks your heart. I looked across the room. Sam was there. Emmy too. Yolanda wasn't. And that was all right. This isn't a story about anger, I continued. It's a story about coming back to yourself, about remembering your worth after years of forgetting it. When I stepped down, the congregation didn't clap. They stood, in quiet respect. After the service, Sam ran up to me. He hugged me tighter than he had in months. Grandma, he whispered. I miss you. I held him close. I miss you too, baby. Then he looked up, eyes wide with something deeper than childhood. Is it true Mommy did something bad? I crouched to his level. It's true that grown-ups make mistakes, but what matters is what we do after we know better. Are you going to live with us again? No, sweetie, but I'm close, and I'll always be your grandma. He nodded solemnly, the way only a 9-year-old trying to understand adult things can. That evening, I found myself on the back porch with Evelyn, watching the sun dip behind the trees. You think she'll ever ask to talk? She asked. Maybe, I said, but I'm not waiting, because waiting had stolen enough of my life. Now I was writing my own chapters. I hadn't expected Yolanda to show up at the workshop. Not after everything that had happened, the forged signature, the cold eviction, the church apology. We had drawn lines in the sand, and though she'd done her part so far repayment, confession I knew better than to expect transformation to happen overnight. So, when I looked up from the folding table at the back of the church basement and saw her standing in the doorway, I felt a cold tingle rise through my spine. She wore jeans and a faded blue sweater, no heels, no makeup, her hair pulled back like when she was a teenager and didn't care what the world thought of her. She clutched a notebook in both hands, like a child about to confess something in front of the class. The other women in the room didn't notice her at first. They were chatting quietly, sipping lukewarm coffee, flipping through the handouts I had made the night before. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a dull yellow over the folding chairs, the bulletin board covered in pinned announcements, and the blackboard still half covered in chalk from the Sunday school class. Yolanda didn't move until I met her eyes, and when I did, I didn't flinch. "Evening," I said, not smiling. "Can I join?" I could feel every eye turn to her now. "Are you here as my daughter?" I asked plainly, "or as a student?" She swallowed. "As a student." I nodded once and gestured toward the empty seat in the back. She made her way there, slowly, each step echoing a little louder than it should have. She sat between a woman named June, widowed last year, and Teresa, who ran the daycare down on 5th Street. Neither greeted her, but they didn't move away either. Small mercies. I turned back to the front and began the session. "Lesson 2, I said. Understanding co-signing, shared debt, and why helping out can turn into legal entrapment." The women laughed quietly at that last line. But it wasn't the kind of laugh you hear in comedy clubs. It was the laugh that comes from recognition, from knowing too well what it feels like to be asked sweetly, gently, persistently to help a family member, only to find yourself on the hook for tens of thousands in unpaid loans or tax debt. I clicked the remote, and the slide changed. "Let's talk about generational guilt," I said. That phrase hung in the air for a moment, heavier than the others. It sounds clinical, but what it really means is this. Someone raises you to feel like your love is only worth something if it costs you, especially in families, especially for women. Heads nodded. "I'm not talking about generosity. I'm talking about when your daughter or son asks to borrow your credit, or when your sister needs your signature on a lease, or when your nephew gets arrested and everyone turns to you for bail money because you're the responsible one, because you're the one who always fixes things." I didn't look at Yolanda. Not directly. But the thing about always fixing things is that people forget you break too. There was a long silence. Then someone in the back whispered, "Amen." I smiled faintly and turned the slide again. A checklist appeared, warning signs of financial manipulation. I went through each one slowly, giving real examples. I saw pens moving furiously. I saw eyes widening. I saw jaws tightening as realization set in. And somewhere in the middle of that, I allowed myself to glance at Yolanda. She wasn't writing. She was crying. Not the loud, gasping kind of tears. Just silent streams down her face, her notebook open but untouched, her shoulders still. I didn't say anything. When the session ended, women gathered their things and came up to thank me. Some hugged me, some told me stories, quiet confessions of checks written and trust broken. I listened. I offered them tissues. I told them they weren't alone. When the room emptied, Yolanda remained seated. I walked toward her slowly. She looked up. "You said people forget you break too," she whispered. "I did." Her lips trembled. "I didn't just forget. I ignored it. I saw you breaking and thought it was your job." I said nothing. She continued. "You know the hardest part about that day? The day I kicked you out? It wasn't your face. It was Sam's. That caught me off guard. He looked at me like I wasn't his mother, like I was a stranger. I've never seen that look in his eyes before. I've been trying to erase it ever since." I sat down beside her. "You won't erase it," I said softly. "But you can learn from it. That's more than some people ever do." She stared down at her notebook. "Do you think I can ever make it right?" I was quiet for a long time. Right doesn't mean going back. It means going forward in truth. Not to fix the past, but to earn tomorrow. She wiped her face. "Will you let me help with the workshops?" I blinked. "You want to help me teach women how not to be taken advantage of by people like you?" She nodded, shame coloring her cheeks. "Maybe it's time I teach what I almost became." I looked at her. Not through her. Not around her. It was the first time I'd seen Yolanda not as a threat or a disappointment, but as a woman trying to rebuild herself from the rubble she caused. "All right," I said slowly. "You can help, but you'll earn your way into that role like everyone else. Fair." "And Yolanda?" "Yeah? This doesn't make us what we were. That version of us died the day you threw me out." She nodded again. "Then I'll just have to earn a new version." And in that small church basement, with the smell of old coffee and the sound of folding chairs echoing around us, I allowed the first brick of something new to settle quietly between us. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the beginning of grace. The following Saturday afternoon, Yolanda arrived an hour early to help set up. She brought coffee, name tags, and a box of pastries from Dunhill Bakery, the same ones I used to buy on Sundays when she was little. Back then, she'd beg for the cinnamon twist and pick the sugar off first. Now she placed the box carefully on the table, adjusted the sign-in sheet, and said nothing as I watched her with quiet curiosity. I didn't comment on the pastries, didn't ask what time she woke up. I just handed her the stack of folders and pointed to the chairs that still needed arranging. She nodded and got to work. We hadn't spoken much since our conversation after the last workshop. I needed space, time to feel the edges of my own boundaries. Still, she had shown up on time, prepared, and quieter than I ever remembered her being. As women began trickling in, most of them in their 50s and 60s, Yolanda greeted each one with a small smile and a name tag. Some gave her cautious glances, unsure of where she stood. A few recognized her from the apology at church. No one said anything, but I could feel the silence weighing on her like a coat she wasn't used to carrying. That day's workshop focused on protecting financial independence during retirement, a heavy topic, and one that carried a strange sort of shame for many in the room. I could see it in their eyes, women who'd worked hard their whole lives only to realize their names weren't even on the accounts they helped build. Women who'd signed papers they didn't understand because a husband or child had rushed them through it. And, as I began to speak, I thought of George. He had always been respectful with money. He asked questions, walked me through every document, never once made me feel less than. But after he died, I realized how much of my life had still been organized around him, his job, his dreams, his legacy. And when Yolanda stepped into that gap, I'd let her carry the pen. That was my mistake. Financial independence is not just about income, I told the room. It's about identity. If your name isn't on the paper, your voice doesn't matter when it counts most. I saw June wipe her eyes. I saw Teresa nod, hands clenched in her lap. Then, I did something I hadn't planned. I turned to Yolanda. Would you like to share your experience? Her eyes widened slightly, caught between fear and obligation. But then she stood up. She didn't walk to the front. She just turned to face the women around her. My mother trusted me, she began. Too much. I used that trust to make decisions that weren't mine to make. A few heads turned. One woman crossed her arms. I told myself I was protecting her, that I was preparing for the future. But the truth is, I didn't want to deal with my own debt, my own fear. I made her responsible for my financial anxiety. The room was silent. Yolanda looked at me, then back at the women. And when she got sick, I saw it as an opportunity to push harder, to get ahead. I told myself it was practical, but it was cruel. She sat down, slowly, without tears, without drama, just truth. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was accountability, and it rippled through the room like a dropped stone in still water. After the session, several women approached her not warmly, but respectfully. One of them, a retired teacher named Helen, said, "That took guts." Yolanda nodded, whispered, "Thank you." I didn't say anything until we were folding chairs together. "You handled that well," I said finally. She smiled faintly. I didn't know how it would feel to say it out loud, but it felt right. I looked at her. Telling the truth always does. That night, after she left, I sat in Evelyn's guest room, reading over next week's lesson plan. But my mind wandered. I thought about the first time I'd held Yolanda, how her tiny hand had curled around my finger, instinctively trusting. I thought about the way she used to braid her doll's hair and scold them like a mother 3 times her age. I remembered the fear in her eyes the day she got her first job rejection, and how she clung to me like a child again, just for a moment. She had always been a mixture of strength and need, of pride and pain, and maybe so had I. Evelyn knocked gently on the door. "You still up?" I nodded. "Can't sleep." She stepped in, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You think she'll keep showing up?" "I think she wants to," I said. "And I think she's scared not to." "That's good," Evelyn said. "Fear's not a bad motivator so long as it's not the only one." I sipped the tea slowly. "Do you think I'm being too soft on her?" Evelyn sat beside me. "No, you're not letting her off easy. You're just giving her a harder road to walk, one where she has to earn every step." I leaned back in the chair. "I don't know if we'll ever be close again." "You don't have to be," she said. Sometimes the best thing you can do for a broken relationship is stop pretending it can be what it was. Let it become something else, something honest. I nodded. Like a partnership. Or like neighbors who happen to share blood. We laughed quietly. Outside the window, the streetlights flickered on. The world was moving forward, whether I was ready or not. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving it, I was shaping it. The workshop had grown. By the time week 5 rolled around, we had more women than seats, easily 30, maybe more. Some brought their daughters, some brought their sisters. A few brought friends who'd never opened a bank account in their own name. We moved from the church basement to the community hall next door, which had better lighting and didn't smell faintly of mildew. I arrived early that day, as I always did, carrying folders and coffee. Yolanda beat me there. She had already set up the chairs in a neat semicircle and was scribbling on the whiteboard. Debt is not your destiny. I had to admit, she had a gift for slogans. I watched her a moment before speaking. You ready for the next topic? She turned, smiled nervously. Trusts and estate planning? About as fun as dental surgery. Then make it worth the pain, I said, handing her the printed handouts. Start with a story. She looked puzzled. Whose? Yours, I said simply. When the class started, I let her take the lead. She stood at the front, less like a daughter and more like a woman claiming her place. Good evening, she began, hands shaking just slightly. Tonight we're going to talk about estate planning, but before we do, I want to tell you a story. It's about a mistake I made and how it nearly cost me the only family I had left. She went on to describe in careful detail how she'd tried to put the house into her name behind my back. She didn't blame it on desperation. She didn't make excuses. She talked about fear, pressure, pride. Then she said something that stopped the room. I thought that owning something meant earning respect, that if my name was on the deed, I'd finally feel safe. But what I did to get there made me someone I couldn't respect. There was a long pause before the first woman clapped, then another, and another. It wasn't applause for redemption. It was recognition. That slow, quiet acknowledgement that we all carry the capacity to betray and be betrayed. Later that evening, after the women left in waves of hugs and whispered stories, I found Yolanda sitting alone, her hand tracing the words still faint on the whiteboard. Debt is not your destiny, she murmured. You believe that now? I asked, taking the seat beside her. She nodded. Yeah, I do. But I also know shame doesn't just vanish. Some mornings I wake up and remember what I did, and it still stings. It should, I said. That's how you remember not to do it again. She looked at me then, eyes softer. Thank you for not shutting the door. I smiled faintly. You earned the crack. The rest is up to you. The next morning, I was at Evelyn's kitchen table, going over the repayment ledger Yolanda and I had drawn up. She hadn't missed a payment. In fact, her last check included an extra $50. You know what that is? Evelyn asked, peering over my shoulder. A guilty conscience? I joked. Interest, she said, grinning. That girl's learning. The doorbell rang. Evelyn went to answer it, and a moment later, she returned with a letter in her hand. Certified, she said, setting it down. I opened it carefully. Inside was a legal notice. From my bank. About the house. I read it once. Then again. My fingers tightened around the paper. What is it? Evelyn asked, her voice serious now. She's trying to refinance again, I said flatly, using my name, without my consent. Evelyn's eyes widened. But I thought, she's still listed as power of attorney on the old documents. I never revoked it. It felt like a kick to the gut. I had been so careful, so thorough, but I had missed something. A back door, and Yolanda had found it. I sat back, breathing shallow. No, Evelyn said. This can't be right. Not after all this. Not after everything she said. I stood. I need to talk to Thomas. Today, we drove in silence. My chest felt tight again, not from illness this time, but from betrayal's second sting. Thomas greeted us with his usual calm. When I handed him the letter, he read it without a word. Then he said quietly, This wasn't processed yet. The application was flagged, probably because of the prior inquiry. But yes, it's real. She tried again. Evelyn cursed under her breath. I just closed my eyes. Thomas leaned forward. Do you want to press charges this time? I shook my head slowly. Not yet, but I want everything locked down, every access, every account, every signature, gone. He nodded. We can do that. We spent the next 2 hours revoking old permissions, freezing shared authorizations, and placing alerts on any future inquiries using my social security number. By the time we left, I was exhausted, but I was clear. Back at Evelyn's, I called Yolanda. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, Ma. Don't speak, I said. My voice was ice. You tried again. No excuse. There was silence. And then, I panicked. You lied. I thought maybe. You thought wrong. Please, she whispered. Don't shut me out. I took a breath. This is your last chance. There will be no more cracks in the door. You want a relationship? Then you walk through the front like a grown woman and you ask. You do not sneak. You do not scheme. I understand, she said, voice shaking. I don't want your tears. I want your respect. And I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, wrapped in an old quilt George's mother had sewn, watching the stars pulse over Dunhill. Sometimes healing doesn't come in a straight line. Sometimes it walks forward 3 steps, then trips and tumbles back down the hill. But I was learning, and so was she. And this time, I would not be caught unaware again. I didn't hear from Yolanda for 4 days after that call. Not a text, not a knock at the door, not a meekly folded note under the doormat at Evelyn's house like she used to do when she was 10 and knew she'd gone too far. The silence felt heavier this time, not peaceful, like after her apology at church, but hollow, like the quiet that comes after something inside a person breaks. Evelyn didn't ask about it. She just went about our routine morning walks, late-night crosswords, setting the table for 2. But she watched me. I could feel her eyes linger sometimes, as if waiting for my shoulders to slump, for the dam to break. But I didn't break. Not this time. Instead, I planted tomatoes. It wasn't tomato season, but I didn't care. I needed the rhythm. Soil under my nails, a task that reminded me that growth, however stubborn, was always possible. I bought the starter plants from a roadside market, picked out the healthiest ones with thick green stems, and spent 2 hours in the yard behind Evelyn's house digging and whispering old gospel songs under my breath. Somewhere between the 2nd row and the 3rd, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated. Dirt clung to my gloves. My back ached. The sun had started to fall behind the treetops. I let it ring out. When I checked the voicemail later, it wasn't Yolanda. It was Marcus. Miss Clara, I know I got no right, but I just want you to know I didn't know she tried that again. I found out yesterday. She kept it from me. I confronted her. She's not doing good. She's ashamed. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I thought you should know. I played the message 3 times. Each time, I focused on the tone. There was no manipulation, no guilt-tripping, just a man standing in the ash of someone else's fire, trying to hand me a broom. I didn't call him back, but I didn't delete the message either. That Sunday, I went to church alone. Evelyn had a headache and insisted I go without her. I dressed in a pale lavender blouse, George always said, made my eyes look soft like evening light. I hadn't worn it in years. Pastor Willard's sermon was on discernment. He spoke about the power of saying no, not from anger, but from wisdom. Even forgiveness, he said, must have boundaries. Even grace needs gates. Afterward, I lingered by the rose bushes outside the chapel. They had just started to bloom small, determined buds breaking through winter's long silence. That's when I saw her. Yolanda stood by the parking lot, arms crossed, staring down at her feet. She wasn't wearing her usual makeup. No heels, no jewelry, just jeans, sneakers, and a sweatshirt that hung loose around her shoulders. I didn't walk to her. I waited. Eventually, she saw me. Her steps were small, hesitant, like she wasn't sure the ground would hold. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not reporting me, for not burning it all down." I said nothing. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope. I revoked the power of attorney, had it notarized. "The bank has it. So does the lawyer. You're safe now." I took the envelope. "I should have done this the day I left your house." "I know," she said, eyes glassy. "I let you back in too soon." She nodded. "You did, and I used that. I used your hope. I looked at her then. Really looked. She didn't seem broken. She seemed emptied, like someone who had finally stopped fighting the wrong battles and was trying to find a new war worth waging. I want to make something clear, I said, voice even. You don't get back in just because you bring me documents. This isn't a puzzle where the right piece unlocks the past. I understand. You want something from me. Say it. She paused. I want a relationship, not what we had. Something honest, even if it's just coffee once a month. That's not much, I said. It's all I know how to ask for right now. I let the silence stretch between us. Then, you remember that time I was sick and you were 16? The flu hit me bad. I couldn't keep anything down. She looked confused. Then her eyes widened. You made me soup, from scratch. You fed me, sat by the bed, changed the sheets. You missed school for 3 days. I remember. You knew how to love me once, Yolanda. You just forgot how to honor that. Tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't try to wipe them. I looked at the envelope again, then folded it and tucked it into my purse. Coffee, I said. Once a month. At that little spot off Maine. You bring the honesty. I'll bring the time. She nodded. Smiled, just barely. And for the first time in years, I believed her. As she turned to leave, I stood by the roses, fingers brushing a new bloom. It wasn't healing, not yet. But it was the first cup of something warm. We met for coffee on the first Sunday of April. Not at her house, not at mine. At a small cafe tucked behind the library on Main Street, the kind with checkered curtains, too many mugs hanging from the ceiling, and a waitress named Frankie who'd been serving pies and sharp opinions since the Reagan administration. Yolanda was already there when I arrived. She chose the corner booth. Smart. Less visibility. More privacy. I slid into the seat across from her, my palms still cool from the breeze outside. You look nice, she said. I didn't answer that. I opened the menu, though I knew it by heart. Their banana bread is good, I said. I remember. Frankie came over with a grin and 2 coffee mugs. Well, look who it is. Haven't seen you here in years, Clara. You bringing back old memories or making new ones? I gave a polite smile. Just visiting an old spot. Frankie winked and poured the coffee. Call me when you're ready to order. When she left, Yolanda traced the rim of her mug. I was nervous you wouldn't come. I said I would. I know, but I don't always trust what I hope for. That struck me. Maybe because I understood it too well. You want to talk, I said. So talk. Yolanda looked up. I enrolled in a course, she said. Night classes, personal finance and ethics. I raised an eyebrow. Ethics? She nodded. I figured I can't help anyone until I understand why I keep helping myself first. I sipped my coffee slowly. Good start. I've also been seeing a counselor, she added, glancing down. Not just for money stuff. For everything. I didn't push. And Sam? I asked. Her face softened. He's good. We talk more. He asks questions now. Hard ones. I don't lie. Don't lie to yourself either, I said. She nodded. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I stiffened. If that's another document. It's a letter, she said. Not legal, just words. For you. I wrote it last night. I hesitated. Then took it. Didn't open it. Just slid it beside my saucer. I want to earn your time, Yolanda said. Not just visit it. You've taken the first step, I said. That's all this is. The first step. Frankie came back with our banana bread. We didn't talk much after that, just sipped, chewed, and let the air be light for once. That was the first time I didn't feel like I was interviewing my own child. When we said goodbye, there were no tears, no declarations, just same time next month and a nod. That night, I sat at Evelyn's kitchen table and opened the letter. Dear Mama, there are so many things I could say, but none of them seem big enough to cover what I did. I hurt you. I tried to manipulate the one person who gave me everything. You trusted me with your life's work, and I treated it like a shortcut. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I see you now, not just as my mother, but as a woman, a full woman, with dreams, with strength, with dignity. I used to think of you as a rock, unshakable, unmovable. But now I understand. Even rocks crack under enough pressure. I never asked where you kept your pain. I only saw the ways you helped everyone else, and I assumed you had no needs of your own. I'm sorry for forgetting that you are human, and I promise I will spend however long it takes to remember it every single day. Love, Yolanda. I folded the letter carefully, pressed it flat, and placed it in the drawer with my old family recipes. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was another stone in the bridge. The next week, I stood in front of the workshop class, which now had more than 40 women. I told them we were starting a new phase, legal readiness. I printed packets on revoking power of attorney, asset protection, and the importance of keeping everything in writing. You may love your children, I said, but don't hand them the keys to your future. Love with boundaries, trust with paper. Laughter rippled through the room, but heads nodded too. After the session, Teresa came up to me. She had tears in her eyes. I revoked my son's name from my account, she whispered. He was taking money each month, told me it was for groceries. But he wasn't buying food. He was buying scratch tickets. I placed my hand on hers. You did the right thing. She smiled. You saved me. That night, Evelyn made peach cobbler, and we sat out on the porch. You ever think about moving out? She asked. Getting your own place again? I looked out across the dark street. I've thought about it. Too soon? Not too soon, I said. But maybe, not just yet. She nodded. You've got time. No one's kicking you out this time. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt safe in that truth. I moved back into my house in early May. Not because Yolanda asked me to, not because the past had suddenly rewritten itself into something soft. I moved because it was mine, because I'd earned every beam, every tile, every hour spent sanding floors and clipping hedges, and because I was ready to reclaim what had been taken without permission, not just the deed, but the dignity that went with it. The decision came quietly. One morning over coffee, Evelyn looked at me and said, "You miss your windows." I laughed, surprised by the truth of it. I miss my porch more. So I packed. Not all at once, and not with drama. Just a few boxes each day, my cookbooks, my framed photos, my Sunday shoes. Evelyn helped, of course, grumbling about her back and emotional labor, but her hands were gentle when she wrapped the tea set George's mother left me. When I arrived at the house, it was early evening. The sky was bruised with purples and golds, the yard had been mowed, the walkway swept, the mailbox painted. Small things, but I noticed them. Yolanda was waiting by the door. She held out the key. I made copies, she said, but I deleted the spares. I took it from her without a word. I cleared the guest room, she added. Put clean sheets on your bed. I'm not a guest, I said calmly. She nodded, stepping aside. I walked in. The air smelled faintly of lavender and pine sol. My favorite mug sat on the counter. My recliner had been moved back to its old spot by the window. There was no speech, no welcome parade, just the hum of the fridge and the creak of old wood under my feet. And it felt good. That night, I slept deeply. No coughing, no watching the ceiling fan spin above a borrowed bed. Just me, under my own roof. The next morning, I made eggs and grits and ate alone at the kitchen table. I didn't look for conversation. I didn't invite any. Yolanda came downstairs eventually, glanced at me, and poured herself coffee. We sat in silence for several minutes. Then, she said, Sam wants to come by this weekend. I looked up. That's fine. He's got questions, still confused about why I had to apologize at church. Let him ask. I will, she said. I don't know how to make it simple. You don't, I said. You make it honest. That's what lasts. She nodded, slowly. That afternoon, I received a call from a woman named Ruth, mid-60s, recently widowed. She'd heard about the workshops from someone at the pharmacy. I didn't go to college, she said over the phone. I don't know what half of these terms mean, but I just found out my husband left our house in his brother's name. I scheduled a one-on-one meeting. That became the start of a new branch of the workshop's private financial coaching. Word spread fast. Soon, I had more women calling, asking if I could meet over lunch, coffee, sometimes just a walk. They didn't want lectures. They wanted someone to look them in the eye and say, "You're not dumb. You were just too kind to ask questions." And I said it. Over and over. "You're not dumb. You were just too kind to ask questions." Sometimes, that one sentence broke open years of pain. One woman, Margaret, brought a shoebox full of unopened bank statements. "He always said he'd handle it," she whispered. "Turns out he'd gambled away half my pension." We cried together. Then we got to work. Meanwhile, Yolanda kept coming to the group sessions. She sat in the back, took notes, sometimes helped clean up, never asked for praise, never interrupted. And I noticed the women had started to warm to her, slowly. It wasn't because she made speeches. It was because she stayed. Stayed after. Stayed accountable. Stayed visible even when her shame begged her to hide. One evening, after the session ended and everyone else had gone, Yolanda stayed behind to wipe down the whiteboard. I was stacking chairs when she spoke. "I got offered a part-time job at the bank." I looked over. "As what?" "Teller assistant, starting small. Background check cleared, barely." I smiled faintly. "You gonna take it?" She nodded. "Yeah. I think it's time I handle other people's money the right way. Make sure you handle your own first." She laughed softly. "That's the plan." That night, as I sat by the window with my journal, I flipped through my notes from the very first workshop. "Teach from the scar," I had written, "not the wound." And I realized that's what I was doing now. My wounds had scabbed over, still tender, but no longer open. I wasn't teaching as a victim. I was teaching as a woman who had been buried under betrayal and clawed her way back to the surface. And each time I helped someone else do the same, the world tilted back into place one heartbeat at a time. By the time summer settled into Dunhill, the house no longer felt haunted. Not by betrayal, not by silence, and not by the memory of that day Yolanda had shouted, "Get that old woman out of here!" The echoes had faded, replaced by newer sounds, Sam's laughter on the porch, Yolanda's voice reading out loud from a finance textbook in the living room, the kettle whistling just before 7 a.m. We weren't a family again. Not quite, but we were something close enough to carry. Sam had taken to visiting every Sunday afternoon. He'd bring a small bag of groceries, fruit, sometimes homemade cookies, and plop himself on the couch like he used to when he was a boy. He didn't ask about the past, not directly, but his eyes flicked between us like he was measuring the air for tension, as if waiting for a storm he remembered, but no longer felt. One afternoon, he brought a photo album. "Thought we could look at some old stuff," he said casually. "See who had the worst haircut." Yolanda laughed, a soft, surprised sound. "That's easy you did at 12. That bowl cut was a crime." As they flipped through the pages, I watched them from my chair near the window. Yolanda pointed at a picture of her high school graduation, her arm looped through mine. "I thought I'd conquered the world that day," she said. "You looked like you were about to cry," Sam teased. I was scared." She turned to me. "But you kept squeezing my hand, just enough." And suddenly, I was back in that moment. The way her hand trembled, the way I pressed her fingers and whispered, "You're ready." Funny how memory comes back, not in full, but in feeling. Later, as I walked Sam to his car, he lingered a moment at the driver's side door. "She's really trying," he said. "I see it." He looked down. "You ever think about what comes next? Like when you're really old?" I smiled. "You mean older?" He blushed. "I just mean, do you want to stay here alone forever?" I looked back at the porch light flickering in the dusk. "I don't feel alone anymore." He nodded slowly. "Okay, just checking." That night, I lay in bed thinking about his question. What does come next? I'd been so busy recovering, rebuilding, protecting, I hadn't thought about dreaming. But a dream came to me anyway. A community center. Not just the workshops. Not just folding chairs and church basements. A real space. For women like me. A place to learn, rest, grow. The next morning, I wrote it down in my notebook. The Clara House. A place to come back to yourself. I brought the idea to Evelyn first. "You trying to be famous now?" she teased. "No. I'm trying to be useful." She grinned. "Then let's start making phone calls." We spoke with the local council, a retired architect, and a grant writer from the women's shelter. It was slow work, paper-thin patience and mountains of logistics. But each meeting lit something in me. Yolanda offered to help with the budgeting. "I won't touch a single dollar without your signature," she said, raising her right hand like she was testifying in court. I chuckled. See that you don't. We toured an old storefront by the park used to be a daycare. Light streamed through wide windows. The floors creaked. The walls needed paint. But it had good bones. I can see it, I whispered. Yolanda stood beside me. Me too. Over the next weeks, word spread. Donations trickled in. Volunteers offered time and supplies. Women from the workshops came with brooms, paintbrushes, folding tables from their own garages. It felt like resurrection. One afternoon, while scrubbing the windows, I overheard Teresa talking to a newcomer. I used to be ashamed, she said. Now I'm a volunteer. All because one woman told me I wasn't dumb, just too kind. I blinked back tears. By August, we were nearly ready to open. We planned a small ceremony, nothing fancy, just punch, cookies, and testimonies. Yolanda designed the logo, a pair of open hands cradling a key. She asked me if I'd speak. I said yes. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, same one George and I bought 30 years ago, and wrote out my speech longhand. I didn't start with betrayal. I started with resilience. I'm not a hero, I wrote. I'm just a woman who got tired of surviving and decided to live again. When opening day came, the hall filled with people. Friends, strangers, women who'd once been broken and now stood with their backs straight, shoulders square. I stepped to the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and saw Yolanda standing near the back, her hand resting on Sam's shoulder. For the first time, I didn't see what we had lost. I saw what we were building. The grand opening of the Clara house was on a Saturday. Warm air, dappled sunlight through trees, folding chairs lined up on the lawn like a small army of hope. We didn't have banners. No marching bands, just handmade signs, fresh lemonade, and women in their Sunday best, some with walkers, some with grandbabies perched on their hips, some standing alone, holding purses like shields and smiles like apologies. I arrived an hour early, wearing a powder blue dress Evelyn insisted on pressing the night before. It says, I'm ready, she had told me. Yolanda was already there, clipboard in hand, directing volunteers with quiet authority. The woman who once shouted me out of my own house now stood calmly beside a chalkboard that read, Welcome home. The words hit me like a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Welcome home. The ceremony was simple. Ruth lit a candle for those who didn't make it to this day. Teresa read a poem about women's hands, how they build, how they hold, how they sometimes shake but still reach forward. When it was my turn to speak, I took the microphone and let my eyes scan the faces, so many now familiar, some still fresh with the ache of betrayal or the confusion of rediscovered self-worth. I used to believe my story ended the day I left my house with a single suitcase and pneumonia in my chest, I said. But here I am, breathing, stronger, not because life got easier, but because I decided I was worth the fight. Soft murmurs, nods, a few tears. I continued, this house isn't just about finances or legal forms. It's about something deeper, dignity, the kind they don't teach you to protect, the kind people expect you to give away quietly, out of love or obligation. A long pause. Well, I say enough of that. A ripple of clapping began, slow and steady, then swelled into something whole. I held the mic close. I want you to know, if you've been taken advantage of by a system, by a stranger, by someone you once fed and bathed and rocked to sleep, you are not alone, and you are not stupid. You are simply too loving in a world that counts on your silence. When I stepped down, Yolanda met me at the bottom of the steps. She didn't speak, just hugged me, briefly, but tightly, then wiped her eyes and returned to her clipboard. She didn't need to say it. I knew. Later that evening, after the last cookie was eaten and the folding chairs were stacked, I sat alone in the common room of the Clara house. The walls still smelled faintly of paint. A bookshelf donated by Margaret now held pamphlets on estate law, grief support, and affirmations handwritten by the women who built this place with their healing. Yolanda stepped inside quietly. One of the ladies left this, she said, holding out a small wooden box. I opened it. Inside were two things: a photo of a woman I didn't recognize, smiling beside a young girl, and a note in careful cursive. Thank you for giving me a reason to believe I could start over. She's my granddaughter. I didn't think I'd live to hold her, but I did, because you taught me I could fight. I held the note in my hands, heart heavy and lifted all at once. She didn't leave her name, Yolanda said. She didn't need to, I whispered. She's one of us. The next morning, I walked the neighborhood. Same sidewalks, same mailboxes, but something had changed. People smiled when I passed. One woman waved from her porch, another slowed her car to shout, "I heard about your center, my sister's going next week." I felt seen, not as the woman who got kicked out, not as the victim of a family betrayal, but as Clara Thompson, the founder of something real. When I returned home, Sam was at the kitchen table helping Yolanda with a spreadsheet. I poured myself tea and joined them. "Ma," Sam said, "you ever think of writing a book, like, about all this?" I laughed. "Who'd want to read it?" Yolanda looked up. "I would." She meant it. I paused. "Maybe one day. For now, I'll settle for building rooms people can breathe in." That night, as I crawled into bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me just like it had the night I left this house in tears. Only now, I was under my own roof, on my own terms. Forgiveness wasn't a ribbon tied around pain. It was a decision, a boundary, a door that could open slowly only when the person knocking had earned their entry. Yolanda was still knocking, and for the first time in years, I didn't dread the sound. August faded into September with the slow grace only small towns and aging hearts can understand. The heat relented. Leaves hinted at turning. And the Clara house settled into rhythm classes twice a week, drop-in counseling on Thursdays, and every third Saturday reserved for what we called kitchen table talks. No schedule, no curriculum, just coffee, pound cake, and women gathered in a circle, telling the truth out loud. That third Saturday of September, the circle was full. Yolanda sat across from me, a soft cardigan wrapped around her shoulders like armor she no longer needed. Evelyn had come, two more out of curiosity than need. She brought her signature lemon bars and a notepad, though she never wrote in it. I introduced the topic gently. "What's one thing you let go of this year?" There was a silence. Then Ruth spoke. "Anger," she said, "at myself, for not seeing the signs." Teresa nodded. "Shame. I carried it like a purse. Never put it down." Yolanda hesitated before she spoke. "Control," she said quietly. "The kind that disguises itself as care. I thought I was protecting my son, my mother, but really, I was just scared to let life happen without my fingerprints on everything. I didn't add mine right away. I let the silence hold for a moment longer. Then I said, I let go of the idea that justice means apology." The room stilled. "I waited a long time," I continued, "for someone to say the exact right words in the exact right way. But justice didn't come like that. It came through me, through boundaries, through reclaiming, through building something from the rubble." Murmurs of agreement moved through the group like wind in tall grass. Later that evening, back at the house, Yolanda lingered in the kitchen while I rinsed dishes. "You meant that," she said. "I did. I've been trying to say the right thing for months. Maybe I should have just been showing up." "You have been." She leaned against the counter. "Sometimes I still hate the woman I was, the one who screamed at you to leave." I dried my hands and turned to face her. "She's part of your story," I said, "but she's not your ending." Yolanda's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "Do you think we'll ever be normal again?" I smiled, slow and deep. "I don't want normal. I want honest. And I think we're already there." The next morning, Sam showed up with a surprise, a hand-drawn blueprint. "What's this?" I asked, adjusting my glasses. "It's a garden," he said proudly. "Back lot of the Clara house. Raised beds, flowers, vegetables, a bench or two. I've been learning about therapeutic landscaping in class." Yolanda beamed. "He's turning into his grandmother." "Lord help us," I teased, but my throat caught when I saw what he'd labeled the plan in bold pencil strokes. Clara's garden. We broke ground the following week. Women showed up in droves, some with gardening gloves, others with sun hats and memories of the gardens they once kept before husbands died, knees gave out, or children moved away. It became more than a garden. It was a place to kneel without shame, to dig into something that gave back. Evelyn donated wind chimes. Teresa painted a sign that read, "Still growing." One crisp morning, I stood in the center of it all, dirt under my nails, the smell of mint and marigold thick in the air, and felt something click into place. Not forgiveness, not completion, but peace. And it didn't feel fragile. It felt earned. That afternoon, as I closed up the center, Yolanda met me by the door. "There's a woman asking about a Saturday spot," she said. "Says she just lost her sister and needs somewhere to sit and cry. Put her on the list." She asked if we had room for grief. I locked the door and turned to her. "We always have room for grief. That's where healing begins." As we walked to the car, Yolanda slipped her arm through mine. No grand gesture, no words. Just warmth. Just us. The first frost arrived early. I stepped out one morning to find the garden dusted in white, the last of the tomatoes sagging under their brittle stems. I touched one gently, its skin cool, the life inside still clinging, still sweet. Some things fade slow, some not at all. Inside the Clara house, the heater clicked on for the first time that season. Yolanda had beaten me there. She always did now. Mornings were her rhythm, hot coffee in a to-go cup, soft jazz on the radio, and a printed schedule already clipped to the bulletin board. "You're early," I said, setting down my gloves. "You're late," she teased. There was something easy in our banter these days. No landmines, just two women moving forward. We had a new group starting that morning, widows. All over 60. Some dressed sharp, with pearls and pressed skirts. Others wore grief on their sleeves, soft cardigans hanging from thin shoulders, wedding rings still firm on fingers despite years alone. I watched as they gathered around the table, introduced themselves not by their pain, but by their passions. I used to teach dance. I quilt, keeps my hands from trembling. I read murder mysteries. Don't judge. There was laughter, then stillness. Then one woman, Mavis, spoke. "My husband handled everything," she said. "Bills, taxes, passwords. I didn't even know how to log into the bank account. After he died, I sat on the floor and cried because I couldn't pay the water bill. It wasn't just grief. It was shame. I felt stupid. That word. Stupid. How many times had I heard it? How many times had I said it to myself? I leaned forward. "You weren't stupid, Mavis. You were loved into ignorance. It happens. What matters now is that you're here." She blinked back tears. "That's why I came. I figured, if I'm going to cry, I might as well learn something too." Yolanda smiled gently. "That's the best reason I've heard yet." After class, we sat with Mavis for an hour, helped her write down passwords, showed her how to check her balance online. Small steps, big weight. Later, as we locked up, Yolanda turned to me. "Remember when I didn't even know where the mortgage papers were?" "I remember," I said. "You pretended you knew everything." She winced. "I did. I really thought love meant control. Now you know better. Now I ask questions." She paused. Even when the answers hurt. We stood on the porch a while, watching frost melt from the sidewalk. Sam drove by, honked, waved. Yolanda waved back, then looked at me. "You ever wish you had another daughter?" That caught me off guard. "No," I said simply. She looked down. "I wished I had you," I added. "The version of you I knew was buried under all that fear. I wished she'd come back." Yolanda's eyes met mine. "Do you think she's back now?" "I think she's still digging, and I think she's almost there." That weekend, we hosted our first Legacy Day. It was Evelyn's idea. "Too many of us waiting to die before telling our stories," she said. "Let's speak them now, loud and alive." We invited women to bring keepsakes. Pictures, letters, old recipes. One woman brought her grandmother's Bible. Another, a faded photograph of herself on a picket line in 1965. Yolanda stood before the group, holding a folded scarf. "This was my mother's," she said. "She wore it when she cleaned houses, tied it around her hair like armor. I used to think it was just a rag. Now I know it was her crown." The women applauded gently. When it was my turn, I didn't bring a thing. I stood with empty hands and said, "My legacy isn't an object. It's a room full of chairs, a garden behind a building, a file folder on every desk. It's women telling the truth. That's all I've got to give." And it was enough. As the sun set, Yolanda and I sat on the front steps, watching the women linger, laughing, hugging, sharing rides home. "You built something real," she said. "We did." She hesitated. "Mama, when you're gone, I want to keep it going. Not just the Clara house. All of it. The mission. The message." I looked at her, this woman who had once shouted at me like I was a burden, now asking to carry my legacy. "You'll have to earn it," I said. I know. You'll have to keep listening, keep learning, keep serving. I will. You'll fall again. I'll get back up. I nodded. Then you're ready. That night, I dreamed of roses, of young women I didn't recognize planting them in our garden, of laughter echoing through the Clara house long after I was gone. And I smiled in my sleep. Because legacy, real legacy, it doesn't end with your breath. It begins with your choice. October arrived wearing its brightest colors. Amber leaves danced down Dunhill's sidewalks, and the trees outside the Clara house blazed with red so vivid they seemed on fire. The garden beds had slowed, but not died. Collards still held strong. The rosemary stood upright and defiant, like a grandmother at a town hall meeting. Inside, the workshop room was full, again. This time, we weren't discussing deeds or financial abuse. We were talking about endings, the quiet ones, the painful ones, the kind you plan for and the kind that take you by storm. We called the session, Letting Go with Dignity. Ruth had prepared a handout. Yolanda had made a checklist for final wishes, funeral plans, wills, medical directives. I had brought a shoebox full of George's things. Today, I said, I want to show you what love looks like after goodbye. I opened the box slowly. Inside, his old pocket watch, a faded handkerchief he always carried, a picture of him holding baby Yolanda the day we brought her home. He planned ahead, I said. Every detail. He wanted to make sure I never had to ask a stranger how to bury him. It was his last gift to me. A hush settled over the room, the kind of reverence born not from fear but from respect. Afterward, the women broke into smaller groups. Some cried, some laughed, some stared at nothing at all, memories surfacing like old photographs from a drawer. Yolanda walked with me to the kitchen, wiping her eyes. You never told me he did all that, she said. I didn't think you needed to know. I did, she said. I needed to see what a good man could look like. That evening, back home, we sat around the dinner table, me, Yolanda, and Sam. He'd come straight from class, textbooks under one arm, the smell of campus still clinging to him. I have a paper due, he said, halfway through his pot roast. They want us to write about a turning point, something that shifted us. Yolanda raised an eyebrow. Plenty of material in this family. He smiled at her, then looked at me. I'm writing about you, Grandma. I nearly dropped my fork. Me? You changed the direction of 3 lives, probably more. Yolanda nodded. He's not wrong. I swallowed hard. Just tell the truth, Sam, that's all I ask. I will, he said. I always do now. That night I pulled out my journal and added a new entry. They're watching. Even when you think they aren't, they are. So stand up straight and choose the truth. Every time. In the days that followed, something strange began to happen. Men mostly started asking if we offered sessions for them. Quietly, sometimes through their wives or daughters. Others dropped by after hours, pretending to check the plumbing or deliver supplies, only to linger by the doorway as I packed up. I'm not here to complain, one man named Doug told me. I didn't realize how much I leaned on her, until she was gone. Grief needs a chair, too, I said. So we set up a new group, for the ones left behind. Yolanda helped lead the first session. Ruth baked a pie, I brought tissues, and together we made space. It wasn't weakness, it was reverence. And every time someone spoke up, I felt George's hand at my back. Then, one Friday morning, I received a letter. No return address. Neatly folded. Inside was a note written in careful cursive. Dear Miss Clara, I attended one of your first sessions. Sat in the back. Didn't speak. You said something I can't forget. You're not stupid. You were just too kind to ask questions. That line changed my life. I left a dangerous man. I started over at 63. I now have my own checking account, a cat named Ruthie, and a small garden full of life. You didn't know my name, but you saved me. Thank you for being the voice I needed when mine was still trembling. I held the letter to my chest and cried for a long time, not out of sadness, but because I finally understood. All those years of pain, of silence, of betrayal, they hadn't buried me, they had planted me, and now the bloom had come. That Sunday, Yolanda brought home a surprise. I bought it with my own money, she said proudly, placing a small cardboard box on the table. Inside, A custom nameplate. The Clara House, founded by Clara Thompson. Where women reclaim what was taken. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I just reached across the table and took her hand. Her grip was steady, and it no longer trembled. The first snow came late. Not the heavy, bruising kind, but a soft, dusting flakes like whispered apologies drifting down over the rooftops, coating the garden beds in white lace. From my kitchen window, I watched as the rosemary bowed under the weight, stubborn and still standing. Like me. It was Sunday. My house smelled of cinnamon and strong coffee. Yolanda was setting the table, moving with the quiet assurance of someone who no longer felt like a guest in her own history. Sam sat at the counter, tapping away at a laptop, earbuds in, his face lit with the glow of concentration. We weren't the family we used to be. We were something better stitched together by truth, not appearances. We had frayed in all the right places and mended with gold. After breakfast, we drove together to the Clara House for the end-of-year gathering. It had become tradition now, hot cider, testimonies, a memory table lit with candles for those we lost, and those we almost lost, but held on to just in time. I stood near the doorway as people arrived. Women wrapped in scarves and purpose. Widows, grandmothers, young mothers, daughters, friends. Some with walkers, others with fire in their stride. Every face familiar, every story sacred. Teresa wheeled in her sister, who'd finally agreed to come after hearing Clara helped a woman who didn't even know her social security number. Margaret brought her grandson. He needs to learn what women can survive. Evelyn handed out name tags and lemon cookies shaped like keys. Yolanda moved through the crowd with practiced grace, hugging shoulders, offering tissues, remembering every name. There were no traces left of the woman who once threw my clothes into the street. Only the daughter who now carried my mission as if it were her own heartbeat. The program was simple, an open mic, soft music, a slideshow of moments from the year. Then the lights dimmed, and I stepped onto the small platform we called a stage. I didn't carry notes this time. I didn't need them. I used to think my story ended when I got sick. I began. That pneumonia would take me, or if not, then the betrayal would. The room held its breath. But endings lie. Sometimes they just want to see what you're made of. I let my gaze drift to the women seated before me. You don't have to come from strength to arrive there. You can come from silence, from being left, from being used, from being told over and over again that your worth is measured by what you give, not what you keep. A few heads bowed, a few hands clutched tissues. Well, I'm here to say, you're allowed to keep yourself. A quiet murmur of agreement. A single tear rolled down Mavis's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. I was thrown out of my own house, told I was a danger, a burden, an inconvenience, but I walked away with something more valuable than a roof. I paused. I walked away with clarity, and with clarity came power, not revenge, not bitterness, power, the kind that builds things. I gestured around the room. This building, this community, these stories. This is what betrayal built when it met a woman who refused to stay broken. Applause rose, not like thunder but like church, slow, deep, sacred. Afterward, women lined up not for photos, but to speak their truth. Yolanda stood beside me, listening to each story, each thank you, each whispered, "I didn't know I could survive until I saw you do it." When the last candle burned low and the chairs were folded, I stood in the garden behind the house, now blanketed in snow. Yolanda joined me. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied, eyes on the stars. "We did." She took my hand. "I was thinking," she said, "we could add a scholarship for women going back to school after 50. I looked at her. Truly looked, and saw not just my daughter but the next chapter. "You lead it," I said. "I'll back you." "You trust me with that?" I smiled. "I trust you with everything." She squeezed my hand. "Then let's write the next story." And there, in the hush of snow and promise, I realized this wasn't a conclusion. It was a legacy, born not from perfection, but from pain made purposeful, from silence turned voice, from loss turned foundation. And as we walked back into the warmth of the Clara house, I felt it fully. Not an ending, but a homecoming. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always come with apologies. It comes through action, boundaries, and the quiet strength to rebuild after betrayal. Clara's journey shows that dignity can be reclaimed no matter how late or how broken things seem. It teaches us that justice doesn't always wear a robe or carry a gavel sometimes. It grows in a garden, sits at a folding table, or speaks truth in a borrowed room. Most of all, it affirms that legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we live every day when we choose to stand tall, speak up, and lift others as we rise.